April 7th, 1945. On the misty horizon of the Pacific, the largest warship ever built by humanity sets off silently on its final journey. Its name, Yamato. A steel colossus, a symbol of Japanese imperial pride, now transformed into a sacrificial piece on a board where the war already seemed decided. It was the last card of a cornered empire, a final cry of defiance against the inevitable, launched in the midst of despair. But this is not just a story of metal and gunpowder. It is the story of men. Men who were on board when the sky fell. Men who witnessed the end of an era. From young sailors, many barely out of their teens, to veteran officers who had seen the ups and downs of the Imperial Navy, each of them carried the weight of a nation on the brink of collapse, immersed in the honor of their mission and the terrible inevitability of their fate. They knew where they were going, and that their return was an unlikely miracle. In this video, you'll experience the final moments of the Yamato, told through real-life accounts, tactical details, and the memories of the few who survived the impossible. Prepare to delve into the annals of history, where the grandeur of a machine clashes with the fragility of human life amid the chaos of war, and where honor and despair intertwine in an unforgettable tale of sacrifice and loss. Designed in absolute secrecy, the Yamato was Japan's response to the growing U.S. threat in the Pacific. Construction, which began in 1937 at the Kure Naval Shipyard, was such a restricted national security project that even the ship's existence was kept secret from most of the world and, to some extent, from the Japanese people themselves. To ensure the steel colossus remained invisible to enemy spies and satellites, drastic measures were taken. First, the hiding roof. A gigantic screen of hemp and straw was erected over the construction dry dock, completely blocking aerial and ground views. This structure was so massive that it resembled an artificial mountain. Second, employee control. Workers were forced to sign confidentiality agreements under penalty of death. Anyone who might have had contact with the ship's plans or dimensions was subjected to strict controls. Third, mistaken identity. The Japanese referred to the 460mm guns as 40cm guns in all public documents. This disguise was intended to deceive American intelligence into underestimating the ship's true firepower. Conceived in the late 1930s, when naval doctrine still advocated the supremacy of battleships, ships capable of engaging and destroying enemy fleets in direct combat, its construction represented the pinnacle of Japanese naval engineering and a massive investment of resources in a time of scarcity imposed by the impending war. Engineers were instructed to create a ship unmatched by any American or British counterpart, a floating fortress capable of turning the tide, especially against the feared U.S. Iowa-class battleships. At 263 meters long and weighing over 70,000 tons at full load, the equivalent of about 14,000 adult elephants, the ship was a monster of the seas. Her main armament consisted of 9 460mm guns housed in 3 triple turrets, the largest guns ever mounted on a battleship. Here's the true scale of her power. The shell. Each armor-piercing shell, Type 91, weighed over 1,400 kilograms, the equivalent of a small car, and contained an explosive warhead more than 10 times more powerful than any American naval munition of the time. The range. These shells could be fired at a distance of over 42 kilometers with astonishing accuracy. This meant the Yamato could open fire on an enemy before it could even sight her on the horizon. The impact. To give you an idea of her devastating power, a single such shell was capable of piercing the armor of any other battleship of the time, including the American Iowas. The force of a full salvo, 9 gigantic shells falling from the sky, was a theoretical nightmare for any fleet. Complementing this firepower, the Yamato possessed a secondary battery of 12 155mm guns, as well as a vast array of anti-aircraft artillery, which would be continually expanded throughout the war. Her armor was legendary, designed to withstand the largest naval calibers. The main side armor was an impressive 410mm, 16.1 inches thick at the waterline, and the main deck was protected by 200mm of hardened steel. This all-or-nothing design concentrated armor on vital areas, making her nearly impenetrable to torpedoes and shells fired by other ships. The Yamato was, in theory, unstoppable in a traditional naval duel, an apex predator forged to reign supreme on the oceans. But there was a crucial problem, a flaw inherent in its very design and the strategic vision that conceived it. The Yamato was built to defeat ships, not planes. It represented the pinnacle of a naval doctrine that was rapidly becoming obsolete. War, by that point, had already changed its nature. Naval supremacy no longer came from powerful naval guns in battleship duels, but from the skies, with the overwhelming rise of aircraft carriers and their vast fleets of aircraft. This behemoth, designed for traditional naval combat, found itself tragically outdated even before its final mission, a relic of an era of direct confrontation. The Yamato's colossal power was an anachronism in a theater of war where the threat came from above, not from the horizon. It was a ghost ship, the largest and most expensive in history, but utterly unprepared for the new reality of American air power.
In the spring of 1945, the Japanese Empire was surrounded and bleeding. The tide of war had turned irrevocably against Japan. The Mariana Islands had fallen, providing the Allies with bases for the massive bombardment of Japanese cities, and the Philippines was being retaken. The battle for Okinawa, the last defensive line before the Japanese mainland, was at its height, bloody and desperate. Japan's hope of victory was slim. Defeat was only a matter of time. In this scenario of collapse, the Japanese military leadership, wedded to the concept of total sacrifice, sought any drastic means to halt the enemy advance and inspire a last fanatical stand among the people. Kamikaze attacks were already a daily reality, transforming aviators into human missiles. Operation Tengo, Operation Heaven or Paradise, arose from this same ethos, a mission defined by desperation, renunciation, and total sacrifice. The plan was simple in its brutality and suicidal in its conception. Send the Yamato and a small escort task force, the light cruiser Yahagi and 8 destroyers, to Okinawa. The mission had no long-term tactical ambition. It was, in effect, a futile diversionary tactic. The most shocking aspect was the complete lack of air cover. The Japanese Air Force was either virtually destroyed or being used on kamikaze missions. The Yamato would be a massive, slow-moving, and completely exposed target in an era of warfare dominated by air power, a decision that would doom the fleet from the start. The mission commander, Vice Admiral Seiichi Eito, a pragmatic and respected officer, immediately grasped the futility. Reports indicate that he vehemently opposed the plan in command meetings, calling it a useless mission, and criticizing the burning of such a valuable and symbolic asset in a desperate act. He argued that if Japan was about to lose, the ship should be saved for the final defense of the main islands. However, faced with the imperial order, the emperor's will, Eito ultimately accepted, understanding that the sacrifice would be used as a political and moral symbol, a final appeal to the nation's suicidal fervor. He knew he would not return. The crew, comprised of over 3,300 men, was not deceived about their fate. The sailors were warned that the mission was one way, no return, and the maintenance crew was given fuel only for the outward journey. It was the darkest warning. In their final moments before departure, the sailors did the only thing they could. They wrote farewell letters to their families. These letters, sealed and tucked into their uniforms, were the testament of a generation driven to war, accepting their fate with a complex mix of honor, resignation, and a deep sense of duty. For them, death in combat on such a vital mission was not a personal tragedy, but the pinnacle of duty and honor, a final manifestation of the samurai spirit, Bushido, translated into steel, blood, and unwavering courage in the face of certain death. The final order for the Yamato was clear: attempt to break the American blockade, reach the coast of Okinawa, intentionally run it aground, and use its massive 460mm guns as coastal artillery to defend the island to the last man, to the last shell. It was a ritualistic sacrifice designed to inspire fear in the enemy and fanatical loyalty in Japan. The world's greatest battleship would be transformed into a static fortress, its final voyage a steel epitaph for the Empire.
At noon on April 7, 1945, the Yamato's fate was sealed. American reconnaissance aircraft, specifically a PBM Mariner, detected the Japanese fleet approximately 100 nautical miles north of Okinawa. There was zero surprise. The predictable route and the fatal lack of air cover made the task force an easy target. Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, commander of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, did not hesitate. Aware of the Yamato's strategic and, above all, symbolic importance, he mobilized an overwhelming strike force from Task Force 58. Rather than risk his own ships in a naval duel, Spruance relied on air power. 3 successive coordinated waves totaling more than 380 aircraft. The objective was not just to damage, but to annihilate. At 12:34 p.m., the gray sky transformed into a whirlwind of steel, lead, and fire. The first wave, composed of dive bombers, helidivers, torpedo bombers, Avengers, and fighters, Hellcats, launched itself at the Yamato and its escorts. The American tactic was ruthless and effective, exploiting the giant's design flaw. First, anti-aircraft suppression. F-6F Hellcat fighters flew low to strafe the Yamato's 25mm and 127mm anti-aircraft emplacements, forcing the gunners to take cover and reducing defensive fire. Second, focused torpedoes. The torpedo bombers attacked from multiple angles, port and starboard, simultaneously. This tactic was crucial as it prevented the crew from effectively counterflooding the compartments to correct the ship's list. Most of the torpedoes were concentrated on the port side, maximizing damage to a single flank. Third, light armored bombardment. SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers focused on the superstructures and upper decks, where the armor was thinnest, devastating command posts and fire control systems, and, most cruelly, claiming lives in the exposed gun emplacements. The steel wall, designed to withstand naval projectiles, was overwhelmed by attacks from above and below the waterline. Torpedoes struck the ship's flanks, shaking her violently and creating leaks. Catastrophic flooding began immediately, with water rushing into the lower compartments, overwhelming the capacity of the bilge pumps. Despite the relentless violence, the Yamato, with its almost mythical resilience, withstood the initial blows. Her anti-aircraft artillery spewed fire, creating a wall of shells in the air, but it was a desperate stand. Her massive 460mm guns, the very reason she existed, were slow, ineffective, and useless against the nimble aircraft surrounding her. On deck and inside the ship, chaos was utter. High explosive and armor-piercing shells exploded, creating an inferno of fire, toxic smoke, and scalding steam. Surviving gunner Shiro Kagata recalled the horror years later. The sky turned to smoke and fire. The deck was ablaze with inextinguishable flames. The smell of burning flesh and molten metal was unbearable. The ground shook like an earthquake with each explosion, feeling as if the world would crumble beneath our feet. Amid this chaos, damage control officers heroically attempted to counterflood the compartments on the opposite side. These acts of bravery and sacrifice were no longer enough. The Yamato was trapped on a battlefield it was not built for. The battleship's naval supremacy had ended, not in a clash of titans, but in a unilateral execution by air power. The giant was mortally wounded, condemned to a slow and brutal death.
After nearly 2 hours of relentless, coordinated attacks, the Yamato was mortally wounded. The relentless barrage of torpedoes and bombs had finally overwhelmed her monumental armor and damage control systems. At least 12 torpedoes breached her internal structure, causing catastrophic flooding in her lower compartments, and at least 7 heavy bombs devastated the ship's deck, superstructure, and upper systems. The concentrated attacks on the port side caused cold, relentless water to rush into the internal compartments at a terrifying rate, overwhelming the bilge pumps and pushing the ship to its structural limit. The Yamato began to list violently to port, a clear and irreversible sign of her imminent collapse. The list grew by the minute, and the gigantic ship, once the symbol of invincibility, now struggled against its own physics, succumbing to the cumulative force of the blows. The crew heroically tried to contain the flooding, counter-flooding compartments on the opposite side to try to right the ship, but it was a losing battle. Orders were given, men ran, but the destruction was overwhelming. At 2:02 p.m., Vice Admiral Ito, aware of the imminent end and refusing to abandon ship, ordered the remaining crew to abandon ship. Many threw themselves into the sea, facing death by drowning or burns from the burning fuel. At exactly 2:23 p.m., the inevitable happened, in a way that transcended tragedy and became legendary. A gigantic explosion of apocalyptic proportions shook the sea and sky. It was the result of the catastrophic detonation of one of the main ammunition magazines, probably the ammunition magazine of bow turret number 1, where the 460mm shells were stored. The force of the explosion was so colossal that it created a cloud of smoke and debris visible for miles. A mushroom-shaped column of fire and smoke that rose more than 20,000 feet into the air, reaching the stratosphere, an ephemeral monument to total destruction, marking the end of a giant. The shockwave felt by American ships miles away was intense. The ocean then engulfed the Colossus. The Yamato capsized and sank rapidly, taking most of its crew with it to the icy depths. Of its 3,332 crew members, including Vice Admiral Ito, Captain Kusaka Aruga, and most of the crew, only 276 survived, rescued hours later by a few escort ships still afloat and by American submarines watching from afar. The rest disappeared amidst wreckage, fire, and the eerie silence that followed the explosion, becoming part of the dark legacy of the largest battleship in history.
The sinking of the Yamato was more than a military defeat. It was the symbolic funeral of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The greatest symbol of its strength, the pinnacle of its engineering and military prowess, disappeared into the waters of the Pacific, taking with it the last remnants of the imperial dream of domination and the hope of a victory that no longer existed. Her fall marked the end of a naval era, the end of the supremacy of battleships in a war dominated by air power and aircraft carrier tactics, a brutal lesson in technological obsolescence. In Japan, news of the sinking of the Yamato was initially censored to avoid public demoralization, yet her memory, paradoxically, lives on, transcending mere military catastrophe to become a profound cultural and historical symbol. The Yamato is remembered not only as a warship, but as an icon of tragedy and supreme sacrifice. In various forms of media and cultural expression, the name Yamato resonates. In acclaimed anime like Space Battleship Yamato, Uchu Senkan Yamato, where the battleship's hull is transformed into a spaceship to save humanity, it has become a symbol of hope and redemption. Imposing memorials exist in Japan, such as the Yamato Museum in Kure, the city where it was built, which honored the fallen and preserved the ship's history. It is a central theme in countless history books, documentaries, and films, detailing every moment of its existence, from its secret design to its spectacular end. In the emotional accounts of the few survivors who carried the weight and glory of that fateful day for decades, the name Yamato has become synonymous with sacrifice, unwavering honor, and monumental tragedy. Today, it is remembered not only as a formidable war machine, but as a monument to the courage of the men who, even faced with a sealed fate and the certainty of death, fought to the end, fulfilling what they considered their duty to the nation and the emperor, even when victory seemed impossibly distant. The Yamato serves as a powerful reminder of the horrors of war, the relentless evolution of military technology, and the indomitable resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. It echoes not only the strength of steel and destructive power, but the fragility of life and the eternal search for meaning amid the chaos and darkness of global conflict. The story of the Yamato forces us to reflect on strategic choices, the price of honor, and the human cost of war. What lessons can we draw from such a grand yet devastating sacrifice?